Welcome in. My name is Trina. Welcome or welcome back to my channel. Today I am doing a monthly wrap-up of April, and be warned, it is a doozy. I don't know how I got to this point. I did read a lot of novellas this month, but I ended up reading in total 18 books, and that is not normal for me. It was definitely a month where I picked up books and I was just loving the experience of reading. I had a little bit more free time here and there, so I ended up just reading a lot of books, and I'm really excited to talk about them, but I'll try to keep it generally short and sweet, especially for books that I have other videos talking about, in order to make sure that this wrap-up isn't ridiculously long. But strap in, get ready, get yourself a chai or another type of tea or a coffee or just some water and sit down and let's talk about some books together, because I have some that I'm really excited to share. To start off, in the first week of the month, I was kind of in a reading slump. I kind of get like this in the beginning of months, maybe because I'm usually like near the end of months, I'm like, oh, I want to meet my reading goals. I want to read these months. I have to get to these books. And I start cramming in a bunch of books. And then the first week of the next month, I'm like, recollect myself. So it was a slower start of the month, but that doesn't necessarily mean it was a bad start of the month, because I did start off the month with finishing Jade Legacy by Fonda. I have a whole fantasy reading vlog talking about this book. I talked about this series ad nauseum on this channel, but I did finish it in the beginning of the month, so I wanted to mention that I read Jade Legacy. The Greenbone Saga is like a family saga, kind of following a sort of clan mafia style family as they go to war with other clans in their island nation called Kekon. We follow one specific family and we root for that family throughout all 3 books, and we hope for their victory. It's mostly centered around a collection of siblings, but this last book centers around, as the word legacy might have hinted towards, centers around the next generation, their kids, what's going to become of the family in the future, what's going to become of their country in the future, what's going to become of this world in the future. If you watch my video, you know I absolutely adored this. I gave it 5 stars. I love this series, and especially in finishing it, I can see the way that Fonda laid it out from the beginning. It made me appreciate Jade City and Jade War, the first 2 books, even more after reading this, because you really see how each installment serves its own individual purpose in such like a perfect way. And this book just does everything it needs to do to wrap up a series. One of like the best concluding books ever. It introduces some new storylines, but in reality, we are just building on what has already been set up. It is just very final in feeling, even from the earlier parts of this book, and this is a long book. So yeah, I really love this, but I won't talk about it anymore. Watch the video if you want more info. But then right after that, I also was simultaneously listening to an audiobook that I finished up called The Transgender Issue, An Argument for Justice by Faye, who is a trans writer in England and the UK, who narrated the audiobook as well. And this book is a nonfiction book focusing specifically on the issue of trans rights in the current moment. What is the status? What are the issues that should be most important to the trans rights movement? What are the issues that have become more or less important in recent years? It specifically centers around UK trans issues, which I thought was really interesting, because I didn't know a lot about trans healthcare in the UK differing from the US. And in a lot of respects, I kind of just assumed that every country has better healthcare than the US. But in particular, the rules set up around trans youth in England are way more strict and harsh than they are in the US. And in many cases, the slow nature of healthcare systems in public healthcare systems like the UK can actually be really dangerous for trans youth, because there's a very small time period in order to effectively administer puberty blockers and to administer like early steps in the transition process for youth. So it can actually be really damaging. I thought that part was really interesting to learn about. One place in which the US's less strict rules or private healthcare system allows people to get access to that more easily, although specifically rich people in the US, of course, as always. But it also talks about other issues that I found really important. I gave this book 5 stars. Really good audiobook. It goes into also sex work by trans people around the world. I say it's centered around the UK, but the author can't help that that's where she's based. So it really does deal with trans issues around the world. It talks a lot about sex work in developing nations as well. It talks about issues in the US. It also goes into like infighting within queer communities about trans rights or leftist communities about trans rights and how it's sometimes excluded from broader narratives that I found especially important. And it talks about intersectionality of trans identity with race and culture and other aspects. And it also goes into, I think this is even more important in the UK, media perceptions in recent years with trans issues and how punitive and negative they've been and how that's growing and there is like more hatred towards trans people in recent years and how we can best combat that, especially with the tabloid press system in the UK, which I've only heard about secondhand. So yeah, all in all, I really, really loved this audiobook. It wasn't like fun to read. Nonfiction books that I love rarely are, but it was really, really important and provided a lot of needed context, I think, to trans issues that I hear about mostly on social media. And now I'm trying to read more actual books and literature and nonfiction about to get a broader range of opinions and more like hard facts about certain issues. So I really recommend it. I really loved it. And then to kind of pivot in a number of ways, I read my first novella of the month called The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monika Kim. This is a horror novella about Jiwon, who is a first-year college student still living at home with her younger sister and her newly divorced mom. And the whole family's kind of reeling from her father leaving them. And she's kind of going through it. Like, she's kind of losing her mind. All of her friends went off to their dream college and she's staying in community college and she is living in the Bay Area. So I also grew up in the Bay Area and I know that like there is this like really harsh negative stigma around community college in Silicon Valley but like all of her friends left and got into the college they all wanted to go to except for her. So with that and other reasons, she kind of starts going nuts and becomes obsessed with eyeballs. And the way that her mom always said that the eyes on the fish were like the best part of the fish, she becomes obsessed with wondering like what would human eyeballs taste like and why would the blue eyeballs taste the best, because her mom's new boyfriend has like these blue eyes that she becomes kind of nuts about. I thought the concept here was really, really interesting. As you can tell, like I'm really into the concept and the idea, but I only gave this book 2.5 stars. I didn't really love the execution. I thought it was kind of poorly written. It's very, very tell not showy. Like we are very much told like this is how I feel about these people that I don't like, and it's like it goes about really important subjects and really interesting subjects in the context of horror in terms of like Orientalism and fetishization, I can never pronounce that word, of Asian women, which are really important subjects. It's gone about it in like a very blunt, like telling, not showing, like I said, kind of way that I don't really like reading. And then on top of that, the ending was really, really bad. Like I don't want to spoil it, but how do I explain? I don't like horror books that do like cop-out endings, I guess I would call it. And that's what this one kind of felt like. So I didn't enjoy the ending and I didn't enjoy the writing throughout, and I just felt like it could have been done better. I didn't mind the length. I thought that made sense for the story being told, but there was a lot of things I didn't like about it. So it was kind of a rougher start. It took me a few days to read despite being relatively short, but it did make me want to read good horror. I then read 2 books that I think kind of kickstarted my reading for the rest of the month in terms of being really, really incredible and like making me want to read even more. First, I read an actual novella by Amal El-Mohtar called The River Has Roots by the same author as one of the authors who wrote This Is How We Lose the Time War. This is a new release that I was so excited for. I put on hold the day it came out of the library. I was so, so pumped, and it was stunning. This is written as a fantasy, very fairy tale-esque writing style, very mystical and magically written. It specifically centers around the relationship between 2 sisters who both are part of a family that mines these trees that live by the river and like connect and kind of speak to each other. And these trees are so magical because the river flows from the fairyland, Faye. I don't remember what they call it in the short story. They call it something else, but like there is the fairy world that people are aware of. And this river flows from that fairy world and carries magic in it. So these trees kind of pick up and collect that magic and mind the river. So then the sisters are part of a family that mind the trees, and they sing to the trees, and their voices kind of collect the magic as well. And part of what makes the magic in this book, it's such a short book, there's so much going on, but part of what makes the magic in this book really, really cool is it's based on grammar, like writing and grammar, and the way that you put together sentences is how you make magic happen, which is so fun for a book to go about doing. And I would have read like a whole length novel about this specific magic system based in, but it made sense why this story in this magic system was so short. These two sisters are kind of being pulled apart by their respective, like, what they want in life, in terms of one of the sisters kind of wants to get married in the human world and follow their family's path, while the other sister is very drawn to the fairylands because she has like a side plot romance with one of the Faye. And I thought that romance might be the main plot when you start off the book, but then it ends up really centering around the sisters instead and their relationship and finding each other again as adults. And I loved this. I gave it 4.5 stars. I did think, like I said, it was a little short for me. I would have loved more, but it was still really, really beautiful. And I love stories about sisters. I love my sister, and I love stories about sisters who love each other and are like, they're not perfect, they don't always agree on everything, but their relationship is stronger than the forces of the world set against them. I like that messaging, I like that storytelling, and I really, really enjoyed this book. And I love Amal El-Mohtar's writing. I really wish she would write something longer because I would read anything she wrote, but I'll take what I can get, and I still really, really loved it. And then afterwards, I read a book kind of with, in hindsight, kind of similar vibes, even though they're very different, but I read Don't Let the Forest In by C.G. Drews. I keep wanting to say C.J. Drews. C.G. Drews, which is a YA horror book. Like I said, lots of horror this month. And I love YA horror. There's something about that really works for me about, I don't normally like YA. I kind of struggle with a lot of types of YA, but YA horror almost always hits. I also don't really like horror very much. I don't really enjoy like the anxiety of reading like a thriller horror book, but YA horror tends to be way more like atmospheric and vibey, and I end up loving it. So this is like the perfect way for me to combine these two genres in a way that I enjoy. Don't Let the Forest In specifically focuses around two young boys in kind of like an dark academia-esque setting. They're in a boarding school, they're at the high school level, I think. They are both being kind of haunted or like attacked by the forest surrounding this school. The forest has sort of gained, not sentience, but like a sort of life of its own, and is producing these horrible monsters that are really well described and like illustrated in the book as well, so you can actually like picture them, that are coming out of nowhere and are attacking Thomas and Andrew. And they don't really know why, and they are trying to figure out how to stop it while also kind of losing their minds respectively. I absolutely love this. I gave it 4.5 stars. I really, really, really enjoyed this. I wasn't expecting the ending at all. It totally shocked me in like, not like a shock value kind of way, but just that like oh, that's what it is the whole time. I didn't like try to take like a cop-out exit for a horror book. Like, it really embraced the monsters and embraced the forest as part of this world in such a great way. It made me want to read other Andrew Joseph White books, and it also made me want to read more books by C.G. Drews as well, but this in particular, I feel like if you like Andrew Joseph White's take on YA horror, YA queer horror specifically, then I think you would also like this. This just has maybe more flowery, illustrative language, but still same great vibes, and I really, really loved. I also wanted to mention just two miscellaneous audiobooks that I kind of read throughout the month while reading these other books. I listened to two more nonfiction audiobooks, starting off with Hidden Valley Road, Inside the Mind of an American Family by Robert Kolker. This was a recommendation from my sister. It is about both the history of schizophrenia, going back and forth with specifically the history of one family, the Galvin family, living in Colorado, which have the unfortunate circumstance of having 12 children, and 6 of those 12 children, half of them, develop schizophrenia, which is part of the reason why schizophrenia research ends up figuring out that schizophrenia is biologically linked. Like, there's a genetic reason for the disease. which was pretty interesting. I gave this book 3.5 stars. I thought it was really informative. I especially liked the parts about the history of schizophrenia, like the older history of schizophrenia that I didn't know about. But I did feel like the story of the Galvins and the story of schizophrenia, despite obviously having overlap, felt kind of separate throughout the book, and they only started coming together near the end, but like very strongly separate. Like there wasn't really a lot of like binds between the story. Like I don't know how I would have set it up, but I felt very like distinct, and they didn't really blend in a good way. And maybe that was also because I didn't necessarily love the way that the Galvin family was reported on. This is a journalist writing about the family, not anyone in the family themselves like telling the story. Maybe I've just gotten too spoiled with memoirs, but I feel like unlike a memoir, it kind of lacked that like personal touch to their story that I personally would have preferred while listening to it. But I still thought it was interesting. I still learned a lot. I guess I've just been reading so much nonfiction recently that I've gotten kind of spoiled with the quality of my nonfiction, so I'm getting a little bit more picky. And then I also listened to a shorter audiobook called Being Jewish After the Destruction of Gaza by Peter Beinart. This was a shorter book that was really narrated really quite well. I thought Beinart did an incredible job with the narration. I think it was Beinart who narrated, I'm assuming. I always assume the authors narrate, but maybe I shouldn't assume that. But it was really, really well narrated, and it is sort of functions as a persuasive argument towards Beinart's own community, the Jewish community, of trying to separate out the political ideology of Zionism from Judaism and not seeing the two as like the same thing, and wanting people to do so in order so that we can criticize Zionism for its harmful impacts while not seeing those criticisms as an attack on Judaism, kind of. I thought this was really interesting. Like I said, it kind of shorter on the shorter side, and I'm not necessarily the audience for it because, like I said, it was kind of a persuasive argument for the Jewish community, but I gave it 4 stars. I really thought it was interesting and a lot of great arguments and a really interesting perspective, in particular because Beinart also was raised in apartheid South Africa, and he sort of talks about how in deconstructing the way that apartheid created sort of a class division when he was growing up and the way that people felt about that when he was growing up. And he sees that in Zionism, in the political ideology of Zionism and in the occupation of Palestine, and being able to associate those two things in the way that a lot of people who were raised Zionists can't see necessarily, and trying to get people to understand it from that perspective. Like I said, really interesting. I highly recommend it as like a persuasive argument for if you have people in your life that you are trying to talk to about the occupation of Palestine and sharing new perspectives with, then either recommending this book or reading it yourself so you can share the arguments with people, I would recommend, because I felt like I got a lot out of it in that respect. And then getting into the later part of the month, I did some vlogs that are up on my channel because I was loving books and I was like, I want to share these books a lot. So I'll be able to go through these books a little bit faster, I promise. Starting off, I did a 24-hour readathon where I dedicated 24 calendar hours of the day towards reading and just like centering reading for a day that I had a lot of fun with, and I really loved how that video came out too, so if you want to watch it, go for it. But I ended up reading / finishing / starting 4 books throughout the course of that vlog. Starting off, continue with the vein of audiobooks, I also listened to an audiobook during that vlog called I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. This is a memoir about Jennette McCurdy, who is a child actor who was on Nickelodeon, and this book centers around the exploitation and abuse that she was faced with from her mother, and how her mother basically gave her an eating disorder, or like encouraged her to develop an eating disorder that would follow her throughout her adult life. And then the book goes into her mom dying and how her mom has kind of like been dying throughout her entire life. That was kind of the interesting part, is like her mom had survived cancer before, like when Jennette was very, very young. And so her mom being a cancer survivor and cancer being a part of her mom was kind of a part of their entire life up until the point where she got cancer again and then passed away. And then dealing with the guilt from that of being raised with a mom that you always were like terrified of dying, actually dying, and then trying to also cope with all the horrible things that mother did to you. I thought she went about it in such a great way. I gave this book 4 stars. I hope she writes more books, Jennette McCurdy. I really like her writing style, and this felt like I don't know, a debut novel, like, that I would like to see her even develop, because I felt like she has the beginnings of like a really great writer, and I'd love to see more of that. When she's writing from her childhood perspective, her childlike perspective, she's in the voice of her childlike self, and she gives that book a new level of hurt because of that, because you see like the story of her life from this child who loves her mom so much and refuses to see how harmful everything that's being done to her is. But because of that, I also would have liked more at the ending of Jennette actually like reckoning kind of with all those things. But again, it's a personal memoir, so she may not wanted to have discussed those things, but that's kind of one of those things that if you're writing a book that's not like very like not dealing with things throughout 70% of the book, then at the end giving a little bit more time and space to really get into the like why these things are so harmful could have been interesting. But like I said, I really loved it. I thought it was really well written, and I'm sure everyone's already read this. I'm behind the curve, but I thought this was really interesting. But then I also read a novella called Walking Practice by Dolki Min. Again, another horror novella. This is a horror novella originally written in Korean about an alien who gets stranded on Earth, and in the process of trying to survive on Earth discovers that they really, really crave and enjoy and need human flesh. They need to eat human beings in order to survive. And they say, okay, well, in the meantime, until I can find a way to get off this planet, I'm gonna eat humans. Well, instead of spending time finding a way to get off the planet, the alien, Mumu, basically becomes like their entire life is dedicated towards hunting people, and they have to contort their scary alien body into a human body in order to attract other humans. So there's a lot of commentary on the beauty standards and on what people expect out of their sexual partners as Mumu's attempting to like bring in victims prey for themselves, which I thought was pretty interesting. And I love the parts of like the descriptions of the differences between Mumu's relationship with human bodies, both as food and as a costume, versus like a human's relationship with a human body. I thought that part was really cool and well written. And the translation was done by Caudle, and I thought she did an amazing job with the translation. It was really cool. I gave it 4 stars, got a lot out of it, and I really am still thinking about it a few weeks after. Like when I first finished it, I was like, it was fine, but it was very short and kind of aimless at certain parts. I'll give it 3 stars maybe. But it's really stuck with me, so I think it is a 4-star read, where I am still kind of like, I still picture like those alien drawings in the book so clearly, and I can like visualize it. I don't know if it's for everybody, but I thought it was really cool. I also read, kind of on a totally different path, I finished Restless Slumber by KJ Sutton. This is book 2 in a series, the Fortuna Sworn series, which is a fantasy romance. I don't think it's romantasy necessarily. I don't know what the distinctions between these genres are, but it is fantasy romance, and it's set in a world where the real world, the contemporary human world, is kind of living simultaneous. Like there are magical creatures living on like in our world. I still am not fully clear, even after 2 books, I'm not fully clear if humans know that magical creatures exist or if they're like just really good at blending in. I still can't, it seems like everybody is a magical creature in this book, but I still can't fully grasp how much humans know or don't know. But the series follows Fortuna Sworn, the main character. Her name is Fortuna. She is a nightmare, and her family are all nightmares, which are creatures that by touching anyone, they can see someone's deepest fears or nightmares and make them like live them and relive them. And they're very powerful and they're very sought after for their skills. So her brother in the first book gets kidnapped and sold to the Faye, and she wants to hunt him down and free him, obviously, because this is her brother, it's all she has left. And in order to do so, she strikes a bargain with the king of the Unseelie Faye and agrees to marry him in order to become queen of the Unseelie Faye, so she has enough power to release her brother. I did give this book 2 stars. I did want to clarify that sometimes I give books 2 stars because like they piss me off, but I can see how some people, like I can see that there's good in it, but like they annoyed me personally. This wasn't like that. This book I gave 2 stars because I didn't mind it so much. It was fine, but I didn't think it was very good. But I was still like there's a lot of things missing, and it is like, I think it's independently published, so you can explain a lot of the issues away with that, but I really, really struggled with the first 30% of this book and the last 30%. And the part in the middle that I actually liked, and maybe it was like 4 stars, didn't really make up for how slow it was at the beginning. The second book follows after a very like heated plot from the first book. And they're just basically like recovering from the events of the first book, but that we don't really get like recovery with a plot line that's supposed to draw us through the series. Like, I know that there's like 3 more books, but right now there's like, well, she has her brother back. Wasn't that the whole point? Like, what more are we going for here other than the romances? Like, the romances were the only things that still had plot in the first 30%, and I didn't find them strong enough to, well, it was clearly strong enough for me to finish the book, but it wasn't really strong enough for me to think it was like exciting or interesting. And then the ending, if you watch my 24-hour vlog, you know the ending kind of annoyed me. I don't know. I don't enjoy books in which virginity and like sexual purity is used as some sort of like plot point in general. Not like I can understand how, I guess there would be some cases where it would make sense as a plot point. It wasn't done well in this series, let me just say. So yeah, and content warnings for the series as a whole. I think it has a lot of questionable content, which I don't mind, but I don't think it's written with enough care or well enough for it to be what it should be. So I'll leave it at that. And then lastly, I started There by Tommy Orange during my 24-hour readathon, and then I actually found a physical copy in a used bookstore. So now I have a physical copy, and I transferred over my tabs and finished it in the physical copy. There is a literary fiction book set around a powwow being planned in Oakland, and it follows the lives of maybe like 10 Native American people living in or around Oakland, whose lives all seem very distinct when we first get a short perspective chapter from them, but then we see how they are all going to overlap at this powwow in Oakland. They're all going to come together in what is like foreshadowed in the beginning of the book to be a really devastating event. I really, really enjoyed this. I thought this was really beautifully written. I ended up giving it 4 stars, and I'll explain why in a second, because there was one thing that bothered me, but for all the good things, it's really beautifully written. All the character relationships and like the webs they weave are really smartly done and really interestingly done. Each character kind of represents a different aspect while also being a similar aspect of the contemporary Native American experience. And even though each character barely gets maybe like 20 pages total, you get really, really attached to each of them and you want what's best for them, which is why the ending for me was a little bit frustrating. That's what kind of docked it down a star for me, was just that there were certain confrontations and conversations that I was getting really invested in seeing their conclusion throughout the book and like seeing how they would play out. And then the book kind of just ends before we get full satisfying debate and everything. And I'm not saying that's bad. God, Tommy Orange is a genius. This is really, I can see what the meaning is behind that, and I think it's so well done. I can't help by what I feel. I feel unsatisfied. Like I wanted even just one more chapter, like one more perspective, but the book just kind of ends and I have to accept that. But yeah, I still think this is incredible. I know that Tommy Orange has at least one other book out because I saw it in the bookstore when I bought this one, but they were different sizes and that annoyed me. But I do want to get that other book and read more from Tommy Orange because the writing and the character building was just really like centered and whole. I love the setting of Oakland as well because, wow, I read so many Bay Area books. It really comes up a lot. For such a techie place, the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, there sure are a lot of books from authors based there. Or maybe I just seek them out subconsciously, but I don't know. But I really, really love this. I want to read more books, I think, about like contemporary Indigenous experiences, because I think a lot of what you learn in school and in history books and in nonfiction books is historical in nature. And I think it's really, really important to acknowledge the incredible work that Native Americans are doing in the present day to hold on to the remnants of this culture that has been absolutely decimated within a lot of countries, but in this case in particular in the US. Loved that. And then I entered my sci-fi era. I literally just finished and posted the vlog of me reading all of these books. So I will do my absolute best to be brief. I know I said I was gonna be brief for the last books and then I wasn't, but this time I swear I'll go quick. Because a lot of these books have similarities. They're all science fiction, they all deal with similar concepts, so I don't necessarily need to go into a ton of detail about all of them, as much as I want to. And plus almost all of them are part of series, so you'll probably hear more about the series as I read the rest of the books in the future, so we can go quick. I started out by reading All Systems Red by Martha Wells. This is the first book in the Murderbot Diaries. It is a novella following a security unit bot that is partially organic human components, but built out of like clone material, like not an actual born human being, with robot parts, designed specifically to protect people, who has hacked its own system in order to control itself and have personal control and not have to follow the bidding of the people that pay for Murderbot services. I love All Systems Red. This first book totally shocked me. After so many novellas this month that didn't get 5 stars, I liked them, but I kept on saying, oh, they're just a little short, they're just a little short. And then I keep reading novellas somehow. But this one was perfect. Despite being short, it didn't need to be longer. It was absolutely perfect. I love the internal conflict that Murderbot faces. It's between the human parts of who they are and the but also like the robot mechanical system AI parts of who they are, and reconciling that. And I don't know, Murderbot's such a relatable, wonderful character, and this was such a great introduction to their world that I fell in love. And so then I had to continue the series, obviously. So then I also wanted to mention I did read the second book, Artificial Condition, which again is another novella in the Murderbot Diaries. This time we're following Murderbot after the events of book 1. They want more clarity about an event in their past that kind of was the origin point for them being able to hack their own module. Basically, the point of searching out this previous event is so that Murderbot can figure out if they're a good person or not. And I loved it. I love the second book. I gave it 4 stars because I think it was a little bit less introspective than the first book, and it took me less by surprise maybe than the first book. You kind of felt the shortness of this second book more in terms of feeling like, oh, we're almost done. That was kind of fast. But I still really, really loved it, and I'm going to continue the series. But I do think the first book was better out of those first 2. And hopefully I'll see if maybe any other books in the series match up to that first book. Because the conflict in the second book was more external. So I imagine if we get back to other internal conflicts, I might love it just as much. And then I picked up the Blighted Stars by Megan E. O'Keefe, which I think I originally got the recommendation from a Carey Can Read video. I really enjoyed reading this book, although it did kind of get overshadowed by the other sci-fi books I was reading. And I wrote out a long ass plot summary to share with you to explain exactly what happened. But now that I'm looking at it, I'm kind of like, I don't really need to share all of this. It's basically set in a universe where there are ruling families who control certain sectors of the market of resources, and with and people, in order to survive in this world, should probably vow themselves to a family, a very powerful family, so they can try to I don't know, make money. I don't need to go into the whole world building system, but basically we're following Tarquin, who is the heir to one of those families, the Mercator family, who specialize in mining a resource that they need called recalcitrite. But a year before the book started, Nyra Sharp, a former member of the family's staff who became a rebel, testified that the mining process is killing worlds. And so now, in the beginning of this book, Tarquin is going with his father on a mission because Tarquin is a geologist, and he isn't super invested in family matters, but he is very invested in whether or not the family is killing worlds. He wants to research the mining process and be a part of them, proving once and for all that they aren't the ones killing worlds. But things go wrong. He and Nyra Sharp end up stranded on a planet, like a dead planet, that was dead before they ever even mined it, and they have to figure out why. It's also largely centered around the romance between Tarquin and Nyra, as they both are they don't really know each other, they don't really trust each other, but then they fall in love, and it takes up a lot of this book. I ended up giving it 4 stars because the world building is sick. There's lichen and fungus and AI systems communicating with lichen in such a creepy and cool way. But I was kind of confused why the romance was moving so fast. And I understand why, because at the end of the book, then the romance like plays into the plot in a way. So it makes sense why they did what it did, but I kept on, when I was reading throughout, I was like, I want to get back to the plot. Like, it's not that important. Like, you guys can be into each other while still centering what's going on. So that was my nitpick with The Blighted Stars, but I still really liked it, and I'm gonna continue the series. Then I read Infinity Gate by M.R. Carey. I love this book so much. I won't give too much detail. It just that it deals with multiple versions of Earth, like the multiverse basically, and jumping between versions of Earth. And it also deals with really, really advanced AI systems. Like, at what point does artificial intelligence just be considered intelligent life and like can create and do on its own? And like, where do we reach that point? And then when do we as humans, as organic intelligence, respect and acknowledge like artificial intelligence? This has nothing to do with like present day AI. I have very different feelings about real world 21st century AI, but this is like in a future in which AI has developed to the point in which it can create and think on its own. And like, where is that point? Where is that cutoff? And like, will we ever really consider AI human? And just a lot of interesting philosophical questions going on in this book, but I mostly loved it because I got really attached to every single character, every single plot line, every bit of the world, every bit of the science I thought was so cool. I'm picking up the second book. It's in my library shelf right now. I'm gonna pick up the second book really soon. I was really, really, you should read this book. If you like sci-fi, you should read this book because I adored it. And then lastly for sci-fi, I read Some Desperate Glory by Emily Tesh. And this is where I knew my sci-fi era has begun, because for the fifth book in my sci-fi readathon, I ended up adoring as well. Like, I just couldn't stop loving them. This book is set around a version of the future in which Earth has been destroyed by an alien enemy, has completely destroyed the planet Earth with 14 billion people on it, now dead. We are following a group of people on a space station called Gaia who believe that they are the last remnants of humanity. Basically, it's like living under military law, under a military regime. You're trained from childhood in order to be a part of the society and fight against the aliens in different ways, but mostly either like systems or military fighting or bearing more children for the future of the human race. So as you can imagine, that part of it then leads into a lot of misogyny and homophobia in the society. And what I really, really liked about this is we follow a character who is probably the most entrenched in the cult, who believes in it even more than any other character in the story. And we really get to see how she grows and unbrainwashes herself and understands more about the nature of humans and relationships between humans and aliens as well, and like what makes an alien that much different than a human. Well, not so much. I thought it was so well done, because so often if you start with an unlikable character, it can be really hard to redeem them, but Tyr, the main character, goes through a lot, and she has this like really, really incredible friendship with this alien Yiso that develops throughout the book as she develops throughout the book, and that like mirrors itself. I gave this book 4.5 stars. I loved it, and I don't know, maybe if I hadn't read it right after Infinity Gate, I would have given it 5 stars, but because Infinity Gate was just that good. Or maybe if I hadn't read it after Infinity Gate, all of these questions about AI and human nature wouldn't have been so fresh on my mind, so I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much. I don't know, but either way, reading them back to back, I really, really loved this. I thought maybe the world building wasn't necessarily as like perfect as it could have been, but the character building really, really makes up for it. And yeah, loved Some Desperate Glory. Really incredible queer sci-fi that I cannot recommend enough. I think this is the longest reading wrap up I've done so far. Like, this is the most books I've read in a month since starting this channel. Yeah, it's a lot. Thank you for sticking with me. But to end off with the last 2 books I read this month, I finished on the last day of the month. The first one was another nonfiction audiobook. To switch from the science fiction to the science, the actual science, I read Not the End of the World by Hannah Ritchie. This is a nonfiction book talking about climate change and the environment and fighting against climate change, but it's particularly unique from the perspective of it's not too late. It's trying to like combat doomsday mentality of like, oh well, the world's already screwed, like it's all over, which I know a lot of people like to joke about online. Like I also joke about online, even though I also know that there's things we can still do to reverse climate change, reverse pollution, bring back biodiversity, all those things. And I was really interested to hear what Emily Ritchie was going to say about it. I was kind of more interested in the specific science. This is my own fault. I went into this book kind of looking forward to learning more about the science between like carbon sinking and reversing the chemical compounds of plastic and all the things like that scientists are actively doing and discovering new ways to do to reverse climate change, which I learned about a little bit in a class in college, and that's what I was kind of expecting. This book isn't really like that. It's more to do with like calming individual panic, and that's maybe like why it didn't necessarily resonate with me. I only gave it 3 stars. It's not a bad rating. I learned a lot from it. I did learn a lot about like, especially the biodiversity chapter had a lot that I didn't know about, and a lot of big picture things about connecting meat and agriculture to other issues with climate change that are really under discussed that I thought were extra important. I'm like, wow, I didn't ever realize this about agriculture and about eating meat, and like I'm gonna cut down on my beef consumption significantly after reading this book. And I thought that part was really, really well done. I guess I was expecting something different than what I got, and I'm also not a doomsday panic mentality person in terms of I do think there's things we can do to fix our planet and change our planet. So if you are a doomsday mentality person, like you think that we're over, we're doomed, we're screwed, I would recommend reading this book because it is for an audience of people that like have lost hope, to give you hope again, but also give you actionable items that you can do in order to be a part of the change. Yeah, I don't know. A lot of the actionable items that Ritchie gave were like, well, governments need to do this. And I'm like, well, that would be so great if governments were just reading this book. There were some things that like individuals can do, and especially it's about reducing the burden on individuals in this book. Like plastic straws don't matter. Plastic bags in grocery stores don't really matter. But individuals can reduce how much beef and like which things they're buying in grocery stores. You can invest in purchasing types of protein in agriculture that are better for the environment than other types, and that part was interesting. Very cool. I just felt like, I don't know. I think the audiobook was also a bad move for this book. I didn't really like the audiobook. It felt kind of patronizing, and I think the author does a really active job at trying not to be patronizing, but the audiobook kind of comes off that way anyways. So I would recommend reading this, not listening to the audiobook. But she does have a fun Scottish accent though, so that does help with the audiobook. But yeah, I wasn't like a huge fan of this, but I do think it's talking about a really important subject that you can learn a lot from. And then lastly, in the final hours of April, I was like, you know what? I started this novella and I'm going to finish it this month. I'm just going to get it done because I only had like 150 pages left. And that was Ring Shout by P. Djèlí Clark. P. Djèlí Clark also wrote, oh, what was it called? Okay, I'm going to put the book up here. They wrote this book as well that I read back in January, which I liked. And the same thing is true for Ring Shout. I really liked it. I thought it was pretty interesting. And I think Djèlí Clark does a really interesting historical fantasy, like building fantasy elements into a historical setting in a really unique way. Like his world building is just crazy. I really, really loved it. In Ring Shout specifically, it's about a group of friends who live in the Deep South in the 1920s and hunt Ku Kluxes, which are not the same thing as the KKK, although they are basically monsters that feed on the hate of the KKK and are like posing as them, but like are actually like flesh dog eating monsters, something. And the main characters are hunting and killing them, which I thought was a really good setup for the discussions that Clark puts in this book, where we're talking about like hate as a concept different from like humans themselves. Like human behavior is separate from like the hate that can infect human behavior, and this creating room for like hate to infect and spread people that start out with good intentions, or something like that. Like I think the messaging in this book is really cool and really interesting, and I'm still thinking about it. It was kind of short and a lot of dialogue in this book, so that like the contemplative important moments we do get are kind of all crammed together in like rapid fire chapters right after one another, which was kind of the same thing honestly with their other book that I read. Oh, A Master of Jinn, that's what it was called. With their other book I read, A Master of Jinn, was also kind of like a lot of stuff was happening and it just sort of happened one after another without time to like process. And in Ring Shout especially so, because it was much shorter, but it still really, really stuck with me for some reason despite those issues. Probably because I just watched Sinners in theaters, which you should absolutely have watched. I loved watching Sinners. But because of that, I feel like I could picture the setting of Ring Shout so clearly in my mind. And then Clark also adds to that in terms of he does a lot of like accent writing. Like he writes down dialects. It's written in the dialect of the main characters in a really, really cool way. And like a lot of like transliteration of dialects that I wasn't even familiar with before. A collection of different Black identities from the United States in the 1920s all in one place, like that were just really cool. I just wish this book was longer. I feel like this is a particular case, unlike a lot of the other novellas I read this month, this is a particular case where the plot and the character building was so much so that I would have given it more than 4 stars if we just had a little bit more time to breathe. But I still really liked it, like I said. So that was how I finished up the month. And in total, those are the all 18 books that I read in April. Yeah, it was a good month, and I'm riding a high kind of into May. I have so many books checked out from the library right now. I always do. But in particular, I have the first Lady Trent series book checked out. I have the last Emily Wilde book checked out. I have the new Ava Reid book, A Fable to End the World, checked out. I also, I started collecting the books. I'm currently working on The Wretched of the Earth. I want to read Assassin's Quest, Another Country, and The Membranes this in May. So I have a stacked lineup for the next month, and I'm really riding the high of how many good books I read in April, just keeping it going. So thank you so much for watching. As always, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, whatever you want to do. I really appreciate you for watching this video all the way to the end, and I hope you got some recommendations from this list. And as always, if you have more recommendations, please send them my way. My library holds list can always get longer, trust. I have enough library cards. I'm gonna fill up the hold list on all of them, so tell me any recommendations you have. And again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Toodles.